Welcome back to another episode of The Radio Psychs, your premier podcast for insights into everything mental health. I'm Dr. Aaron Haddock.
And I'm Dr. Rhonda Yu. We're psychologists who care about people and bringing science to practice.
And we're so glad to have you join us.
Please note that the information shared in this episode is solely intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Today's episode is on how to cultivate forgiveness.
Hey, Aaron, you remember how during our first episode on forgiveness, I confessed that I ate some of your lunch?
How could I forget? And if I recall correctly, you eventually admitted to eating all of it. I guess half a sandwich just wasn't enough for you, huh?
Is half a sandwich ever enough? But hey, you said you forgave me, but clearly you haven't forgotten. Anyways, I want to make it up to you, man. I know you brought lunch today, but let's go grab something. I'll pick up the tab.
Oh, really? Hey, thanks, man. You don't have to do that.
Oh, okay then.
Wait, hold on. That's just a figure of speech. We're getting lunch after the show and you're buying.
All right, good. But seriously, today's episode is all about how to cultivate forgiveness.
That's right. In our first episode on forgiveness, we focused on what forgiveness is and some of the research on why to practice it. In this episode, we're going to cover a research-based process to help us cultivate forgiveness.
Now, you might be thinking, if it's an intrinsic part of human nature, why do we need programs on how to do it?
It's a good question. So, while our capacity to forgive does appear to be an intrinsic part of human nature, it's also a capacity that can be enhanced and a trainable skill we can learn.
That makes sense. Especially when you consider that some things are harder to forgive than others. Why don't we begin by sharing some more about these programs that have been developed to help people develop their ability to forgive?
Great. So as we discussed in the first episode, research on forgiveness really took off in the 90s. And many of those forgiveness researchers have developed their own evidence-based programs to help people become more forgiving. Typically, researchers implement these programs with groups of people and then study the program's effectiveness.
Some of the most effective programs are Fred Luskin's 9 Steps to Forgiveness, which grew out of the Stanford Forgiveness Project, Robert Enright's Forgiveness Process Model, and Everett Worthington's REACH method.
While each of these approaches have unique elements worth exploring, today we're going to provide a synthesis of the common denominators and stages.
So let's dive into how these interventions approach helping people cultivate forgiveness.
Great. The Stanford Forgiveness Project began with what we might call pre-intervention work.
Before getting into the actual stages of forgiveness, participants were given some classes where they learned about how holding grudges can negatively impact our health, along with practical strategies for managing stress and anger.
They also learned how to personalize situations less and empathize more. For instance, they practiced perspective taking and granting grace, understanding that everyone makes mistakes and can cause hurt unintentionally.
For listeners out there who think they might like trying to engage in a forgiveness process, we cover a lot of these skills and strategies in previous episodes, or alternatively, you could work on them with a therapist.
That's a good point. Folks in the Stanford Forgiveness Project were also encouraged to begin with smaller grievances, gradually building their capacity to forgive. Imagine starting with something as simple as forgiving a friend for eating your lunch, and scaling up to more significant transgressions.
Man, you're just not letting this go, are you? All right. Okay, maybe discussing the stages of forgiveness will help.
Maybe.
Okay, so the first phase in the process of forgiveness is deciding that you'd like to forgive, or at least give it a shot.
This is really a decision to stop ruminating on what happened and to try to move on, to give yourself the gift of forgiveness.
Once you've decided to try to forgive, you're ready to move into what Enright calls the uncovering phase. This is where you recall and acknowledge the emotional impact of the hurt.
What do you mean by acknowledge the emotional impact of the hurt?
Good question. Emotional pain and distress manifest in a variety of ways, with the most common being depression, anxiety, anger, distrust, low self-worth, insecurity, and an overall negative worldview. So it's an honest reckoning with the effects of what happened to you and how much it hurt you.
Here, It's important to point out that this emotional distress primarily stems from your thoughts and feelings now about what happened in the past.
In the next stage, you make a conscious decision or choice to forgive and commit to the forgiveness journey, recognizing it as a choice and a commitment to yourself that can lead to emotional freedom and feeling better.
The subsequent stage is about trying to understand the circumstances or perspective of the offender, which may involve cultivating empathy or considering the context of their actions.
This can be challenging, but in this stage, you think about the person who harmed you and try to develop empathy for them. For instance, you might imagine what happened to this person that caused them to be the way they are.
Were they harmed and then harmed you in return? Was their behavior toward you born from their own mistreatment, pain, and suffering?
Can you acknowledge that, like you, they didn't deserve to suffer? Can you recognize your common humanity?
In the following stage, what Enright calls the work phase, you reframe your narrative about the past and shift how you view the event and your expectations. This might involve altering your personal narrative to one that emphasizes resilience and growth rather than victimhood.
It can also be finding meaning in your suffering, what you've endured. This is where we reflect on how our suffering may have changed us in a positive way. Are you more resilient and braver as a result?
Has your suffering altered your values or goals or what you see as most important in life?
Has it inspired you to action, perhaps to fight for change or to serve others in need?
In some forgiveness process models, this is followed by making a symbolic or public acknowledgement in some manner that helps solidify your decision to forgive. But not all agree this is necessary.
For example, in our previous episode, we mentioned Eva Kor, who publicly forgave the Nazis. But the acknowledgement doesn't have to be this big. It could simply be sharing your decision to forgive with someone else as part of healing.
In the final stage, the focus is on maintaining the perspective of forgiveness as a continuous process through ongoing practice and reflection.
Enright calls this the deepening phase. It's where one honors their courageous choice to forgive and experiences new meaning in their life and relief from forgiveness. What Eva Kor called the effects of forgiveness as a miracle medicine.
This may involve regular reflection, meditation, or just becoming a more kind and forgiving person that's committed to ending the cycle of harming others.
Research shows that people who engage in a forgiveness process like this experience significant reductions in negative emotions and thoughts, 2 to 3 times more effectively than those who don't participate in such interventions.
They also tend to see substantial increases in positive feelings and attitudes toward the person who wronged them.
But remember, forgiveness is a process that takes time, patience, and determination.
Yeah, that's right. You got to be gentle with yourself.
And if it's yourself that you need to forgive, remind yourself that you have inherent worth as a human being, no matter what you've done.
Absolutely. And with that, we wrap up another episode of the Radio Psychs.
We hope this episode will serve as a reliable compass to guide you on your journey toward forgiveness with greater ease and understanding.
Take care and be well, everybody. I think it's time for lunch.
Yeah, about that. I have another confession to make.
What did you do to my tacos?
Take care and be well, everybody.